Welcome to season 2 of Erasing Shame. And I am so glad that I have a new co-host. Not that the previous co-host wasn't great, but we have a new co-host to take us into season 2 and give us a fresh perspective from her vantage point. And her name is Maylee Chang.
Yes.
And she is in Minnesota, and I'm going to let her tell you about herself, but let me give you just a brief introduction to our podcast. We started this in February 2018, and we want to have honest talk for healthy living, relationally, emotionally, personally, and mentally. Different aspects of life that we all share as human beings. And shame is such a huge topic, as we discovered in season 1. And so there's so much to talk about. We'll never run out of content, but each season we want to kind of just frame it and give it a little bit of focus and help us to manage our time, because this is a important side project. And we do it just voluntarily from our vantage point. So I encourage you to go back to season 1 to watch some of those episodes. We have interviews as well as conversations. My co-host back in season 1 was Eunice Lee. She was a therapist from a Korean American heritage here in the Pasadena, California area. And we finally met up in person, like towards the end of actually this summer. Yeah, this summer after season 1 was wrapped. And so that was a neat moment to meet in person instead of just on video. And then this summer, we had a special summer series focusing on erasing shame about mental health in Asian American communities. So that was much more produced and nicer videos. We had videographers and sound engineers working on that one. So that's a much more pleasant experience from the production level. So that's all I'm going to say for the show in terms of a review. And you can watch all that on Facebook or YouTube or our website, erasingshame.com. So Maylee Chang, thank you so much for jumping in here with me for some conversations, honest talk about healthy living. And you're a therapist yourself, and you come from a Hmong background. So you have some really neat perspective, and I want to introduce you. Have you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, DJ, for having me to be on board on this really important conversation about shame. So I'm excited to have these conversations. So a little bit about me. DJ said already that I'm a mental health therapist and co-owner of Family Revelations. So I'm Hmong American. I'm a 1.5 generation. That's what they call me. I came here when I was 8 years old. My first 8 years of life was in a refugee camp. And so I got the whole experience. I remember everything from it as a child. And then as a refugee who's grown up in America, in a dominant culture, and having to adjust to all that. So definitely that's a unique experience. But I sure have a lot to talk about what shame looks like in the context of being a refugee. So that's a little bit about me. We'll probably have a couple more sessions to tell a little bit more about myself and what I do, and then also on various topics of shame. Yeah. So what are we talking about in the next couple of months?
Oh, we'll get to that towards the end.
Oh, okay.
So our viewers and listeners will hang in there with us. But we just wanted to warm up and connect with the audience, connect with ourselves, because we've only talked once before this.
Right.
So it's a fresh conversation. So I'm going to be very inquisitive to learn more about Maylee and the Hmongs and the topic of shame. And so I think this will be a rich conversation. And coming from a Chinese American perspective, I'm also 1.5 and came to the U.S. when I was 8.
Okay. Oh, wow. Hey.
Yeah. And I grew up in a small town in Virginia called Winchester with 20,000 people, and it was all pretty much white and colonial. So I don't have much of an Asian American experience like many Asian Americans here in Southern California, where they have lots of Asians and lots of Asian food around here. But I've learned to enjoy that part of life now that I've lived here in Orange County for 10 years now. But I grew up East Coast, but now I'm West Coast. And in my adult life, I have wound up spending quite a bit of time and energy researching and connecting and cheering on Asian Americans in terms of developing the voice, developing their community, and developing their identity. Part of it was just for myself also. And I've noticed that the Asian American conversations have been dominated by 6 ethnic groups. And there's a reason for that, but it's dominated by 6 ethnic groups like Chinese, Filipino, Indian, Korean, Vietnamese, and Japanese. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're dominated by these 6 is because these 6 comprise of 80+% of the whole Asian American population. Mm-hmm. Now, when you're in Asia, you know those ethnicities are all very, very different languages, right, different cultures. And to put them all in one bucket is way oversimplifying, right, and unfair to the diversity that is in Asian Americans. And so actually the Asian American umbrella encompasses 34 different ethnicities. And the media tends to focus on just the East Asian. So I'm very honored and grateful that Maylee could join me from a Southeast perspective, and then you'll find out even more the uniqueness of a Hmong perspective, because truly you're like the minority of minorities.
Yes.
A people without a country. And so that has such a dynamic, perhaps a layer of shame. So so that's what we're getting into in the next 3 or 4, 12 weeks or so. Mm-hmm. And we'll also have some guests talk about aspects of shame. So in that context, what do you think of when people ask you the question, well, what is shame anyways?
Yeah, it's definitely very complex, right? So I think if we were to just look at shame shallowly, right, it would just be it's an emotion. It's something I did and I feel ashamed of, but it's definitely very complex, especially with life experiences and with the work that I do. And it is a human experience, right? It's not Asian American, Western, yes, or Eastern, but it looks different in the environment that we're shaped in and the culture that we're shaped in. And so I am excited to talk about maybe specific ways in which I myself, I can only speak for myself, not for the whole Southeast Asian, because there's so much diversity in that as well. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's personal, it's personal and it's communal. It's deep. I think if we were to really look at shame, it has so many layers. Yes. It comes with history, with deep wounds, with, upbringing, and to unpack that, like you said earlier, that it'll take forever, right? So that's why I guess we're having these conversations to focus on, yes, a little bit at a time. But yeah, it's interesting because I think in my experience, when it's toxic shame, it becomes a condition and it's chronic, and it becomes a part of you. Even though it's a learned experience, it somehow feels second nature. It feels like, oh, I was born with this. I was born with shame. Because it's such a deep part of my culture, part of who I am, in the whole saving face, honoring my family, being a female and how I should, portray myself. And sometimes the shame is mine, but it's more so other people's shame upon me, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I can choose to keep that as my own, or I could choose to build maybe defenses around me to not let it affect me in a way that becomes chronic and toxic to myself. And so, I mean, it's so complex, but that's the gist of my
Yeah.
own experiences of shame and my
Thank you.
understanding of shame. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we do need to talk about it, because it is so complex. We
Mhm.
don't want to just step back and avoid it.
Right.
We want to talk about it more to detangle all the
Mhm.
wires that are messed up for generations and
Right.
generations, so
Right.
that people can live healthier lives, that they can go from survival to thriving, that they don't live with unnecessary emotional and physical burdens, because
Mhm.
we're human and everything's kind of connected. And when we have emotions that are repressed, it'll come out sideways in
Right.
even health illnesses,
Right.
right? And so, and then second thing is that shame festers in the dark. So when we don't talk about it, because they're taboo subjects and they're difficult to talk
Mhm.
about or complex to talk about, then
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And I think,
it becomes heavier. And
right.
so the antidote to that is to talk about it in
Right.
an honest, healthy way. And that's why we're here.
Yeah, right. So just to add to that too, it's interesting because anything that happens by yourself and in the dark, um, it it's interesting because it becomes a myth in your mind, right? So then if you don't talk about it with people, these myths start becoming reality. And then suddenly you're just lost in your myth somewhere, and it's so hard to come out of it. And it takes, what's interesting about that, it takes so long to be there, those wounds to be so deep that I think talking about it, it's going to take a long time for it to come out as well. It
Mhm.
took a long time to take root. Now it's going to take a long time to just
Yeah.
uproot it. And so that's why I'm really
Yeah.
excited to just be part of this
Yeah.
conversation. And yeah.
Yeah. And our hope is that as our listeners and viewers hear our conversation, that it will give you a little more courage and a little more understanding to take that next step towards health for yourself or
Right.
someone you know, because we all have times when we really struggle with shame in a very difficult way, that it impairs us, and we have blind spots, and there's just so much. And the reason we're talking about it is not just for the two of us,
Right.
because interesting topic, but again, we want to help our listeners. And we've gotten some great feedback over season 1 and during our summer, and we would invite you to send us a messenger through Facebook, or send us an email. You can even leave an anonymous voicemail on our website at erasingshame.com. So one more thing on my mind, and then we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
So as we're recording this on September 20th, the chatter in our pop culture has been all around the Crazy Rich Asians and the movie, and the conversations that it's generated for months since the movie came out. And I think one of the genius of the marketing team that released this movie was they got the chatter going months ahead of time. And um, they kind of weaved the story as something bigger than just a movie, that it could be a movement for Asian Americans. And in one way, it could be a springboard, especially for Asian American actors and actresses in Hollywood. And so I'm hopeful that this will open doors for more diversity on the screen. But the movie was predominantly Chinese, although a lot of the Asian cultural elements could be relatable to other Asian groups. So I'm curious, how did the movie come across to you as a Hmong American?
Um, so I think gut reaction. I was just
Mm-hmm.
excited to see an Asian American movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I just saw it as like a flick, a chick flick rom-com that I wanted to see with a bunch of good looking Asian Americans. Yeah, so I was excited to see it as just a storyline. I know that it's received uh, in different Asian settings and cultures, and very different. But yeah, so for me, that's what it was. Yeah.
Great, great. So you're able to kind of dance between the very tight knit Hmong community as well as the broader Asian American community. So that's
Right.
great. And
Yeah.
and I would hope that you would help us engage the Hmong American community and not be blinded to the diversity of Asian Americans as we continue our conversation.
Right. Yeah, and just as you say that, I think it's a learned experience, right?
Mhm.
Uh, to be culturally diverse in my thinking and in acceptance, and
Mhm.
but you're definitely right about having a voice, and
Mhm.
speaking uniquely from just my experience as a Southeast Asian
Yeah.
woman, among female. Yeah.
Yeah. In our technological age, it's amazing just how powerful media is,
Right.
like movies and like social media, and how it's shaping us even more than our family of origin, I think. And studies are beginning to show just how overuse of social media can be detrimental psychologically and emotionally. So
Right.
these are very interesting times. So we want
Mhm.
to engage it and not be fearful. Now, a number of years back, and I don't know the year off the top of my head, but there was a movie that featured the Hmong American community that was titled Gran Torino,
Mhm. I
and
recall that.
the movie star was Clint Eastwood. So, well, I just remember that it was a Hmong American movie, and I could relate to a lot of the Asian family dynamics and living in a foreign country, and Clint Eastwood being Clint Eastwood, eventually came around to be helpful to them rather than just being a cold shoulder to them. I'm curious what you thought of that movie.
Yeah. So it's been a long time.
Being honest.
Yeah, I don't quite remember much about it, but I think my gut reaction to it was, oh, there's a lot of stereotypes in there. Yeah. So I didn't really.
Yeah,
It wasn't positive, right? So that was my gut
that's
reaction.
okay.
But even within the Hmong culture, there's so much diversity in there too.
Hmm.
In terms of religion, tradition, and then being a Christian versus non-Christian. So there's
Hmm.
definitely differences in it. I would have to admit that there were a lot of scenes that happen in there that I couldn't relate to just because I've never experienced it before. So I don't know
Hmm.
whether it's real or not. um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I can't really speak to that piece, but to the other parts of it, I just felt like it was just very stereotyped.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I didn't really receive it well, but that's
Okay.
just my take on it. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, I guess in the number of years since that movie, there have been uh, better writers that can catch the nuance of
Right,
culture and present it more authentically. And
right.
as a Chinese American watching Crazy Rich Asian, there was a lot of authenticity, and even some of the subtle differences between Singapore and America and England. So it's getting better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there, and I think as we participate in social media, that's giving us a voice and helping people get a window into seeing our humanity. So
Right.
this is great. Well, do you have a closing word for us, or I'll just sign off? Um, one of the things I need to figure out is a nice sign off tagline.
We can figure that out together. Um,
Okay.
yeah, did you want to quickly talk about maybe some things that we wanted to go over?
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yes.
So we want to give you a sneak preview into some of the things we're going to be talking about in season 2.
Mhm.
And Maylee has a great list of things that she's compiled, and I've got a great list of special guests that I've compiled. So Maylee first, and
Sure.
then
Yeah. So just from the top of my head, we are going to talk about the experience of shame in being a refugee,
Mm,
trauma and shame, and then also being female, a double minority, right? Some triple minority, as a female Hmong individual and minority. Um, yeah, so the shame that comes along with that. And we'll talk about pride and shame, you know,
mm,
and how that intertwines with each other. We'll talk about, just communal shame, bringing honor to our family or not. We'll talk about that
mhm.
as well. And we'll delve a little bit into mental health and shame in the Hmong
Yeah,
culture as well. Yeah, so that's a
very
little
good.
gist of it.
That's great. And you, I think you also mentioned we're going to touch on the positive aspects of shame.
Yes,
And
that too.
that's worth an episode right there, because shame is cast in such a dark light, and there is a lot of darkness, but there's also some positive aspects that Brene Brown's not talking about.
We
So
need more voices. So yeah.
yeah, I actually tried to invite Brene Brown onto our show,
Oh wow.
but they declined the interview. But at least they responded, so
Right.
that's kind enough of them.
Yeah.
And let's see. Oh, and so I've got one special guest. Her name is Margaret Yu, whom we both know, and she's going to share with us about shame and leadership.
Mm.
I'm really looking forward to that, because I'm kind of in that world as a resource and researcher. And then I've got a number of special guests. Since they're not scheduled, I can't release all their names just yet, but stay tuned on our Facebook page, and we'll give you sneak peeks as we get guests confirmed. And what I can share with you is next week, our guest is going to be Dr. Pong Rhodes, and she is also a psychotherapist there in Minnesota. And she is a veteran of having worked in that community for decades. And she's one of the few Hmong speaking therapists there. And I would imagine, as it is in other Asian American cultures, that psychotherapy is not a normal thing that Hmongs do. Is that fair to say?
That's fair. Yes.
Mm. So we share in that challenge of making therapy a healthy thing for all people to do. So there's a stigma and shame just in that. And it's not just Asian Americans. That's true in mainstream America too.
Right.
That going to a counselor is still not real popular. Anyways, I'll wrap up this episode. We are so happy that we can start season 2. Thank you for tuning in, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, on Apple, on Pocket Casts, whatever you use. You can get the RSS feeds and the Android, Google, all that at erasingshame.com, or search for us in the podcast directory. You can subscribe on YouTube, watch our videos there, and Facebook. We will post our videos there as well. So you can listen on the go, watch the videos, mobile, whatever you like. And if there's anything else that we can do in terms of topics that you would like to hear, please ping us. And again, you can send a note anonymously through erasingshame.com. Maylee, thank you so much for joining me on this episode and for this season. Really look forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, we're going to say bye-bye, and we'll figure out a tagline before the season's over.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.